Hello everyone, welcome to our debate. Today we are going to be discussing which aphid species causes greater damage and losses in agriculture, whether that be the Aphis glycinnes or soybean aphid, or the Melanaphis saccari or sugarcane aphid.
I'm Sadie LeBlanc, and I will be defending the Aphis glycinnes, better known as the soybean aphid.
And I'm Nicholas Valadez, and I will be supporting the Melanaphis saccari or sugarcane aphid. We are now going to move to opening statements, starting with Sadie.
So just a general biology of many aphids. They're usually small, sometimes less than 1/16 of an inch in length. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They can be winged or wingless. They have simple metamorphosis, and many of them have high reproduction rates. Specifically for the soybean aphids, they reproduce based on their host plants, the soybeans, so it can be, their population can be various depending on like the growth stage of the crop. They leave sooty mold, better known as honeydew. They leave leaves yellow and wrinkled and cause plants to become stunted. Their population can be affected by plant nutrition, natural enemies, and even the climate. Also, some unique characteristics specifically to the soybean aphid. They are typically yellow or light greenish in color. They have black cornicles. They have really dark eyes, and their winged adults are slightly larger than the wingless and slightly darker in appearance. For the life history of the soybean aphid, they're native to Eastern Asia and were not introduced into America until 2000, so that was the first sighting. By 2004, the aphids had spread across 22 states and 3 provinces in Canada. It's a pest within the north central region of the U.S. and southern Canada. Depending on the host within their life cycle, there's 2 of them. The buckthorn tree is the primary host, and the soybean crop is the secondary host. So the buckthorn, they rely on it for whenever they are in their egg stage. They rely on it through the winter to be able to remain dormant. And then whenever they hatch, the winged aphids will then fly out to soybean fields and reproduce out there. During the winter months, wingless aphids, females, reproduce asexually at the buckthorn plant. So soybean aphids are a little bit confusing. Some of them reproduce asexually and some of them reproduce through mating with males. They can give live birth up to 3 generations of aphids, and every 2 to 3 generations is whenever the winged females will hatch and migrate to the soybean plants. During the spring and summer months, winged female and male aphids reproduce on the soybean plants. So after soybean season is over, soybean aphids will migrate back to the common buckthorn plant, which is a deciduous shrub located in shelter belts and woodlands of the northern states. That is where the female will lay her eggs, and it is a critical part of their life cycle. Optimal developmental temperature is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The lower is 47.5 and the higher is 94.8. So the behavior, it's a very complex and diverse group. They're mostly terrestrial, sometimes aquatic. They feed on phloem sap, and in early soybean season, these aphids are found on the underside of leaves toward the top of the crop. As the soybean season progresses, aphids move toward the lower canopy of the crop on leaves attached to the nodes. So the real impact they have a very large economical impact within the soybean industry. So when soybeans are not treated effectively, there can be a yield loss of 40% or more annually, which is equal to $2.4 billion every year. So these farmers are losing a lot of money due to these soybeans. The U.S. has reported greater loss than their native country homes. So they have more impact here in the U.S. than they do back in Asia.
So now we're going to move to my opening statement for the sugarcane aphid. So this species was first reported, at least in North America, in the early 70s in Florida. Since then, they've spread across the central United States and northeastern Mexico, and this species is actually specific and native to North America. And it's just now that their genetic diversity is now being understood. So a couple unique characteristics about the sugarcane aphid. They were first found in sorghum crops, actually, along the Texas Gulf Coast in Florida in 2013. and since then they have continued to spread across the Gulf Coast. By 2015, there were reported cases in 17 states and over 400 counties in the U.S. and in almost all sorghum-producing regions in Mexico. They've also been found on both corn and cotton crops, but they haven't been able to reproduce effectively with these specific host crops. So moving on to a little bit about biology, their body color will range anywhere from gray to tan to light yellow. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts, go through simple metamorphosis. They're mostly herbaceous, but some are carnivorous. They're terrestrial for the majority. There's a few select varieties that can live in some aquatic environments, but for the most part they live on land. And like the soybean aphid, they're capable of very high rates of reproduction. They produce large amounts of honeydew, and it appears shiny and sticky on the host plant's leaves. Field observations are usually only indicating asexual reproduction of sugarcane aphids, at least in the United States. So their reproductive populations are influenced by a bunch of different factors such as rainfall, temperature patterns, and the most successful of those reproduction times are characterized by warm and dry conditions. Once a colony is finally established, they can reach numbers of up to 30,000 individuals per plant. So about their life history, all of them are female and give birth asexually to live young. Adults live for about 4 weeks, and some small colonies develop wings that can actually allow them to travel long distances with the help of the wind. But most of the time, they die out quickly without causing a lot of damage to a crop. When it comes to impact of the sugarcane aphid, there's a high economic loss in the agricultural sector, and now that it's affecting sorghum crops in the U.S., there's even more damage there. It puts at risk greater than 90% of the sorghum producing areas of North America. And excessive infestations in sorghum crops can cause plant death, reduced seed weight, and delayed plant development and maturity, which just hurts the sorghum and especially sugarcane industry as a whole. So now it's time for Sadie.
So although the sugarcane aphid can cause a lot of detrimental loss within the agricultural industry, it can be managed through multiple ways. So the sugarcane aphid can be managed by implementation of predatory species such as ladybugs and parasitic wasps. So like we can release things out there to go out and kill them, which is less than what So although the sugarcane aphid can cause a lot of detrimental loss within the agricultural industry, there are many ways that it can be managed. So one of the ways is by the implementation of predatory species such as ladybugs and parasitic wasps. The plant species can also be genetically engineered to be more resistant to presence of sugarcane aphids. So there are several different branches of sugarcanes and sorghum plants out there that have been genetically modified, and the planters can plant out and it's less resistant for sugarcane aphids. While earlier insects were ineffective against sugarcane aphids, modern ones are much more impactful and beneficial to crop producers, and there are about 14 known sugarcane aphid resistant sorghum hybrids that have been tested and have helped reduce sugarcane populations in sorghum fields.
So in response to that, so while the introduction of more of those modern pesticides you mentioned have caused some decline in the impact of the sugarcane aphid, they still present a large problem to the majority of the Gulf Coast areas that produce sorghum crops. The treatment of sugarcane aphids is also largely dependent on the producer's ability to recognize which stage of infestation their crop is at the given time. So with most things, this can lead to human error and an ineffective treatment plan that often causes more damage than intended to the crop or a total loss of said crop. When it comes to your specific species and why I don't think it causes as much damage as mine, so while the soybean aphid may cause massive amounts of economic losses, the sugarcane aphid causes damage to more types of crops, leading to an indirect loss of money to multiple producers, manufacturers, and consumers who are ultimately all affected by the impact of the sugarcane aphid on those crops.
Although you believe that the soybean aphid has less of an economic impact and yours has more, I believe that the soybean aphid has more of an economic impact strictly because the sugarcane aphid can be controlled by many pesticide use. So there's a lot of sprays and stuff that have been out there, such as Poncho, Cruiser, and Gacho, and they can give up to 40 days of sugarcane aphid control. However, common insecticide treatments used on soybean plants can kill the natural predators, and soybean fields will lose another regulator of those aphids. So even though they're spraying to resist from the soybean aphids, they're killing out the natural predators to come out. So whenever the new population comes back, those predators will not be there, so the new population will be able to thrive out in the soybean fields. Soybean aphids cannot be controlled by insecticides, therefore that means that they have a greater economic loss in the long run compared to sugarcane aphids, which can be regulated.
So fair points, but I still believe that since the reproduction rates of the sugarcane aphid can be so drastic in the right climate, it's more of a problem for farmers, especially in the Gulf Coast region, especially in South Texas, to deal with these pests. With perfect conditions, like I said earlier, populations of both the non-winged and winged sugarcane aphids can number in the tens of thousands. This massive population spike can often lead to the complete destruction of a producer's crop. So while soybean aphids may not be able to be regulated by insecticides, they're still not as big of a risk to so many different producers as the sugarcane aphid. So now we're going to move on to closing statements, and we'll go back to Sadie.
So the soybean aphids cause a little over $2.4 billion in economic loss annually within the U.S. agriculture. There have been developments of some soybean aphid-resistant soybean crops. However, they have not been proven to reduce the aphid populations in their area tremendously. So even though that they're trying to modify these plants and come up with ways that they have for sorghum plants, as an example, there has not been one that they have been able to put out in the fields and reduce a population drastically. Farmers cannot regulate soybean aphids by insecticides without eliminating their natural predators, which leads to a loss of regulation when the aphids give birth to their next generation in a few weeks.
And now for my closing statements. So in conclusion for my species, the sugarcane aphid and its ability to reproduce at astronomically rapid rates, given the right environmental conditions, makes it a major risk to producers of sugarcane, sorghum, and many other crops, especially along the Gulf Coast regions of the United States. So while the introduction of modern pesticides may be somewhat effective, populations of the sugarcane aphids still find alternative ways of spreading, like we mentioned, between the wind and the winged varieties that use that system to get around to other host plants and infect other crops in parts of the U.S. that are affected. So I think when it comes to the sugarcane aphid, it's crucial to continue the ways in which integrated pest management could be used to prevent the effect of these pests on agricultural crops, and how even predatory species can be supported and integrated into effective crops in a timely and efficient manner that keeps the natural ecosystem in check and doesn't promote too much of killing off one species and leaving one to reproduce at a rapid rate.
So we both have very strong belief that both of these aphids cause an extreme amount of economic loss within the agricultural industry, and therefore the race is very close between these two based on which one actually causes the most losses within the agricultural industry. We thank you for listening to our debate today. Thanks and gig 'em.